For 3 years, someone I couldn't identify kept me alive in Afghanistan. Anonymous letters arrived before every major operation, coded warnings that gave me just enough information to make the right call when it mattered. I spent those 3 years trying to figure out who was sending them. Last month, I finally decoded the signature. The person protecting me has been gone for 12 years. At least, that's what I've believed my whole adult life. My name is David Chen, and I need to tell you about the letters that changed everything. The first one arrived 6 weeks into my deployment in Helmand Province, January 2019. I was a staff sergeant with the 2nd Battalion, 7th Marines, and we were running security operations out of Forward Operating Base Delhi. Mail call was always chaotic. Guys crowding around, hoping for packages from home, letters from girlfriends, anything that connected them to the world outside the wire. I got a plain envelope, no return address, just my name, rank, and unit designation typed on the front. The postmark was stateside, somewhere in Virginia, but the specific location was smudged. Inside was a single sheet of paper with what looked like gibberish, random numbers and letters arranged in blocks. No signature, no explanation. "The hell is this?" Martinez leaned over my shoulder, squinting at the paper. "Your girlfriend sending you Sudoku puzzles?" "Don't have a girlfriend," I said, staring at the blocks of text. Something about it felt familiar. The pattern. The spacing. "Secret admirer, then. Love letters in code. That's either really romantic or really creepy, Chen." I folded the paper and shoved it in my pocket. Martinez went back to reading a letter from his daughter. She'd drawn him a picture of their dog, and I tried to forget about it. But that night, lying on my rack in the hooch we shared with 8 other guys, I pulled it out again. The pattern nagged at me. I'd seen something like this before, years ago. My mother used to send me puzzles when I was a kid, brain teasers she'd clip from newspapers or create herself. She was an analyst for some government contractor. I never knew exactly what she did, but she loved codes and patterns. Used to say her brain worked in layers, always looking for the hidden meaning beneath the surface. She passed when I was 19. Car accident, they said. Wet roads, another driver ran a red light. I was in my 2nd year at UC San Diego when I got the call from my father. I came home for the funeral, watched them lower the casket, and felt something inside me go numb. My father barely spoke to me that week. He'd always been distant, but after Mom was gone, he became a ghost in his own house. I joined the Marines 6 months later. Needed structure, purpose, something to fill the space her absence had carved out. Now, 9 years after I'd buried her, I was staring at a code that reminded me of the puzzles she used to send. I told myself it was coincidence, grief playing tricks, but I couldn't shake it. I started working on it between patrols, in the few quiet moments we had. The pattern was a simple substitution cipher. A becomes D, B becomes E, and so on. Child's play for anyone with basic cryptography knowledge. But the message it revealed made my blood run cold. Firebase Delhi, February 4th, supply convoy, route Dover, IED implantment 2 clicks north of checkpoint 7. They know your schedule. February 4th was 8 days away. Route Dover was our primary supply route. Checkpoint 7 was a routine security post we manned during convoy operations. I took it to my platoon commander, Lieutenant Ramos. He was 26, on his first deployment, trying hard to project confidence he didn't quite feel yet. Good officer, though. Listened to his NCOs. "Where'd you get this?" He held the decoded message like it might explode. "Anonymous letter, sir. Came in yesterday's mail call." "And you just decoded it? How do you even know it's legitimate?" "I don't. But if it is, someone with access to classified operational information is leaking it through the mail system." He set the paper down. "That's a serious problem, Sergeant. Sir, with respect, the more serious problem is if there's actually an IED en route Dover and we send a convoy into it blind." He stared at me for a long moment. Then he picked up the paper again. "I'll take it to the CO. We'll adjust the route for the convoy. But Chen, don't mention this to anyone else. If this is real, we've got a security breach. If it's not, I don't want panic over nothing." "Understood, sir." The convoy on February 4th took an alternate route. 2 days later, a British patrol hit an IED exactly where the letter had indicated. 2 soldiers didn't make it. 4 others were wounded badly enough to get sent home. The letter had been accurate. I kept the decoded message in my footlocker, underneath my body armor. Started sleeping with my hand on it, like somehow touching it would help me figure out who sent it. The postmark, the typing, the knowledge of our operations, none of it made sense. The second letter arrived in March. Same format, plain envelope, typed address, Virginia postmark. Another block of coded text. This time it took me less than an hour to decode it. Same cipher, shifted by 3 letters. Patrol Route Hawk, March 19th. Ambush, Eastern Ridge overlooking Wadi Crossing. 6 to 8 insurgents, RPGs. They want your squad. March 19th. That was my patrol, my squad. Before I tell you what I did with that information, if you're hooked on this story, hit that like button and subscribe. There are dozens more voices like mine here. And drop a comment with your country. I'm curious where all of you are listening from. I went to Lieutenant Ramos again. This time, he didn't hesitate. Took it straight to the company commander, Captain Wallace. Within 2 hours, they'd repositioned our patrol route and set up a counter-ambush. We went out on the 19th with 2 extra fire teams and air support on standby. The insurgents were exactly where the letter said they'd be. Eastern Ridge, 6 fighters, RPGs, and AKs. But instead of hitting us in the Wadi Crossing, they got hit themselves. Fast ropes from a helicopter, Marines coming down on them from above while my squad provided suppressing fire from below. It was over in minutes. We captured 4 of them alive. Intel got good information from the interrogations, locations of weapons caches, names of local facilitators. It was a significant win. But I couldn't celebrate. All I could think about was the letter. Someone knew, not just general intelligence, but specific details about our operations, our routes, our schedules, and they were using the U.S. Postal Service to warn me. The letters kept coming, one every 4 to 6 weeks. Always coded, always accurate, always just enough information to keep me alive, to keep my Marines alive. By the time I'd received the 8th letter, I'd filled a notebook trying to figure out who was sending them. I'd made lists, cross-referenced everyone I knew who had military connections. My father was a defense contractor, worked for Lockheed Martin doing something with satellite systems. Maybe he had access? But we barely spoke. Hadn't had a real conversation since Mom's funeral. And why would he send coded letters instead of just calling me? My uncle served in the Army, retired now. Could he have connections? But he was in his 70s, living in Florida, barely able to use email. College friends? Nobody I stayed in touch with had clearance access. It didn't make sense. Martinez caught me working on the latest letter one night. We were pulling guard duty together, 2-hour rotation in one of the towers overlooking the perimeter. "You still getting those things?" He nodded at the paper in my hands. "Yeah? How many now?" 11. He let out a low whistle. "And they're always right?" "Every single time." "That's some guardian angel you got, Chen. You figure out who it is yet?" "No." "Maybe you're not supposed to. Maybe some things you just accept." "Not how my brain works." "Yeah, I noticed. You're like a dog with a bone, man. Can't let anything go." It wasn't wrong. It was something my mother used to say, too. "David, sometimes you need to stop solving and start living." But she'd said it with affection, usually while I was hunched over some puzzle she'd given me, refusing to quit until I'd cracked it. The memory hit me harder than usual that night. I could almost hear her voice, see her standing in the kitchen of our house in San Diego, hands on her hips, shaking her head at my stubbornness with that slight smile that said she understood because she was exactly the same way. "You all right?" Martinez was looking at me. "Yeah, just tired." "We all are, brother." The 12th letter arrived in November, my 3rd November in Afghanistan. I'd been in country for 33 months straight, extended twice, volunteered for a second deployment. Part of it was the mission. Part of it was that I didn't have much to go home to. My father and I exchanged maybe 1 email every 2 months. He'd remarried a year after Mom passed. I'd met his new wife exactly once at their wedding. She seemed nice enough. I felt nothing. This letter was different, longer. The coded section was the usual operational warning, an alert about a vehicle-borne IED targeting our base entrance. But there was a second section, personal. It took me 3 days to decode it fully. The cipher was more complex, layered. When I finally cracked it, I had to read it 4 times before I believed what I was seeing. David, I know you've been trying to identify me. I can't reveal myself. Not yet. Not safely. But I need you to know this isn't random. I chose to protect you. I chose you specifically. The work I do gives me access to intelligence most people will never see. I use that access to keep you alive. One day, you'll understand why. Until then, trust the warnings. Stay alive. That's all that matters. R. I stared at that letter for hours. R. Who did I know with the initial R? Nobody with the access or capability to do what this person was doing. Rachel? Rebecca? Robert? Ryan? The vehicle-borne IED hit our gate 3 days later, exactly as warned. But we'd reinforced the entrance, moved the checkpoint back, put concrete barriers in the approach lane. The blast was massive, shook the entire base, but nobody was close enough to get hurt. The driver was the only casualty. Saved by another letter. Saved by R. I went home in January 2022. 3 years, 1 month, 14 days in Afghanistan. 17 letters total. 17 times someone I couldn't identify had kept me alive. The last letter arrived the day before I flew out. Same format, but this time the message was simple. Come home safe. The work continues. R. Now here's where everything changed. But real quick, if you're invested in how this ends, I'd genuinely appreciate a subscription. More soldier stories drop daily. Comment your country below. Always amazes me how far these reach. Stateside felt wrong. Too quiet. Too clean. Too many people who had no idea what I'd just spent 3 years doing, what I'd seen, what those letters had meant. I did the standard reintegration stuff, medical checks, psych evaluations, mandatory counseling. I told the therapist about the letters. She suggested I was experiencing hypervigilance, possibly seeing patterns where there were none, creating a narrative of protection to cope with the randomness of combat. I stopped going to therapy. I settled in San Diego, got a job doing security consulting for a firm that worked with defense contractors. The pay was good. The work was boring. I went through the motions. But I kept the letters, all 17 of them, kept them in a fireproof safe in my apartment, and I kept trying to solve them. I'd been home for 8 months when I got the idea to analyze the postmarks more carefully. I'd looked at them before, but only casually. Now I pulled out all 17 envelopes and laid them out in chronological order. All postmarked from Virginia, but not the same city. The first few were from Arlington, then Langley, then back to Arlington, then McLean. Arlington, Langley, McLean. All within the immediate vicinity of CIA headquarters. My mother had worked for a government contractor, doing analysis work she never talked about in detail, in the Washington, D.C. area before we moved to San Diego when I was 16. I told myself I was reaching. Grief and deployment trauma were making me see connections that weren't there. My mother was gone, had been gone for 12 years. This was someone else, had to be someone else. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. I started researching, looked up my mother's employer, Prescott Analytics Group, found out they'd been acquired by a larger firm in 2015, 3 years after she passed. Their records were absorbed into the parent company. Dead end. I contacted the VA DMV, requested accident reports from September 2010. Took 3 weeks and 2 follow-up calls, but they sent me the file. Single vehicle accident, wet roads. My mother's car went off an overpass on I-495. The medical examiner's report was clinical, blunt force trauma, declared deceased at the scene. There was a witness statement from the driver who'd been behind her, said she'd swerved suddenly like she was avoiding something, but there was nothing on the road, no other vehicles, just wet pavement and bad luck. I read that report sitting in my apartment, and something bothered me. My mother was the most careful driver I'd ever known, obsessively careful. She used to drive my teenage self crazy with her caution, always 10 under the speed limit, full stops at every sign, checking mirrors constantly. Her swerving for no reason didn't fit. I ordered a copy of her death certificate. Standard stuff. Cause of death. Accidental. No autopsy beyond the initial examination. Cremated 4 days after the accident per my father's request. That bothered me too. My mother wanted to be buried. She'd told me once when we'd passed a cemetery and I'd asked why people cared about where they were put after dying. She'd said something about returning to the earth, being part of something larger. My father knew that. Why would he have her cremated?
Unless he wanted to make sure there was nothing left to examine. I felt insane even thinking it. This was paranoia, had to be. Combat had broken something in my head, made me see conspiracies everywhere. But I couldn't let it go. I hired a private investigator. Cost me $2,000 or didn't really have. Gave him everything I had, the letters, the accident report, my mother's employment history, my father's background. Told him I wanted to know if there was any possibility my mother was still alive. He looked at me like I was crazy. Then he took my money. 3 weeks later, he called me. "Mr. Chen, I need to show you something, in person." We met at a coffee shop in downtown San Diego. He brought a folder, didn't say anything, just slid it across the table. Inside were photographs, surveillance photos. A woman in her late 50s, dark hair graying at the temples, walking into a building in Arlington, Virginia. The photos were dated from 2 months ago. My hands started shaking before my brain even processed why. "That's her," I said. My voice didn't sound like my voice. "That's my mother." "I can't confirm that conclusively without DNA," the investigator said, "but the facial recognition software puts it at 93% match, accounting for age progression from the photos you provided. Same height, same general build, same distinctive scar on her left hand. You can see it in the third photo." I stared at the image of the scar, a thin white line across the knuckles. She'd gotten it when I was 8, cutting vegetables for dinner. I'd been there. I'd helped her bandage it. Where was this taken? Outside the new headquarters building, Langley, CIA. The coffee shop was too loud, too bright. I couldn't breathe. "The woman who passed in 2010, the investigator continued, "I pulled everything I could find. The accident report is clean, but I reached out to a contact I have in the Virginia State Police, someone who worked traffic accidents back then. He remembered your mother's case, said it always bothered him." "Why?" "Because there was no debris. When a car goes off an overpass at highway speed, this glass, plastic, metal, the scene was too clean." He flagged it in his notes, but nobody followed up. The medical examiner signed off, the family didn't push for more investigation, case closed. "The medical examiner," I said slowly. "Did you get his name?" The investigator flipped a page in the folder. "Dr. Richard Chen." My father. "I need to tell you what happened next, but first, if this story's got you, show some love with a like and subscribe. I read every comment, especially love seeing where you're all from around the world." I sat in that coffee shop for 2 hours after the investigator left, staring at the photos. My mother, alive, working at CIA headquarters, walking into the building like she belonged there, like she'd been doing it for years. She'd faked her elimination, had to have, with my father's help. He signed the death certificate, arranged the cremation, made sure nobody looked too closely. But why? I drove to my father's house that night. Hadn't been there in 4 years. He lived in a different place now, a condo in La Jolla. His second wife had left him 2 years ago. I'd heard about it through a cousin, didn't reach out. He answered the door in the Rathbobe, glass of scotch in his hand. Looked older than I remembered, thinner, tired. "David." He blinked at me. "What are you doing here?" "We need to talk. About Mom." Something changed in his eyes, a hardness I'd seen before but never understood. "Your mother passed 12 years ago." "No, she didn't." He started to close the door. I put my hand on it. We stood there staring at each other across the threshold. "You signed a false death certificate. You helped her disappear. I need to know why." "You don't know what you're talking about." I have photos of her from 2 months ago in Virginia, walking into CIA headquarters. His face went pale. The glass of scotch trembled in his hand. Let me in, Dad, or I go to the authorities with what I know. He stepped aside. His condo was barely furnished. A couch, a TV, boxes still stacked in one corner like he'd never finished unpacking. We sat in his kitchen. He poured himself more scotch, didn't offer me any. Why? I asked. He was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was hollow. Because I loved her, and she was terrified. Of what? Of me. I felt something cold settle in my chest. What did you do to her? Everything wrong. He set the glass down. His hands were shaking. I was not a good husband, David. I was controlling, angry. I never hit her, but I didn't need to. There are other ways to break a person.
I'd suspected it years ago. The way she'd flinch sometimes when he raised his voice, the way she'd apologize for things that weren't her fault. But I'd been a kid. I hadn't known what I was seeing. She wanted to leave, he continued, but she was afraid of what I'd do, afraid I'd take you from her. I had money, connections. She had nothing, just her job and a son who was almost grown. So she faked her elimination? She came to me one night, told me she'd found a way out. Her work, she'd been recruited by the agency years before, did analysis for them while officially working for the contractor. She'd proven herself valuable. They offered her a position, but it required her to disappear completely. New identity, no contact with her old life. It was the only way she felt safe leaving. And you helped her? I loved her, David. I know you won't believe that, but I did, in my own broken way. And I knew she'd never be free if I didn't let her go completely. So yes, I signed the paperwork, arranged for a Jane Doe from the morgue to be cremated under her name, made sure nobody looked too hard at the accident report. The room was spinning. 12 years. 12 years of thinking she was gone. 12 years of carrying that weight. The letters, I said. She's been sending me letters. He looked confused. What letters? In Afghanistan. Coded warnings, operational intelligence, keeping me alive. I pulled out my phone, showed him photos I'd taken of the decoded messages. 17 times over 3 years, signed with the initial R. He stared at the screen. Then he laughed, but there was no humor in it, just bitter recognition. Rose. Her real name was Rose. She started using Rebecca when we got married. I preferred it, thought Rose sounded too old-fashioned. My mother's name was Rose. R. She's been watching over you, my father said quietly. All this time, she gave up everything to be free of me, but she never stopped being your mother. I left his house and drove to the airport, bought a ticket to Washington, D.C. on my credit card, didn't pack a bag, just went. I spent 2 days watching the CIA headquarters building from a distance, waiting. On the 3rd day, I saw her, walking out at the end of the day, briefcase in hand, moving with the crowd of employees heading to the parking lot. I followed her, kept my distance. She drove to a small house in McLean, one of those quiet suburban streets where everyone minds their business. I watched her go inside, watched the lights come on, watched her move past a window, just a silhouette. I sat in my rental car for an hour trying to decide what to do. Ring the doorbell? Write a note? Drive away and pretend I'd never found her? The decision was made for me when she came back out, walked straight to my car, and tapped on the window. I rolled it down. We stared at each other. She looked older. 12 years older, but her eyes were the same, sharp, knowing. She'd always been able to read me better than anyone. You decoded the signature, she said. Took me long enough. You're always stubborn, like me. She smiled, but it was sad. You shouldn't be here, David. Neither should you. You're supposed to be gone. I am gone. Rose Chen is gone. The woman standing here is someone else. You sent me 17 letters, kept me alive for 3 years. That's not gone. That's still being my mother. She closed her eyes. When she opened them, they were wet. I couldn't just let you face that alone. When I saw the deployment orders come through intelligence channels, saw your name on the list, I had to do something. You risked everything. Your position, your new identity, all of it. You're my son. That doesn't change just because I had to disappear. We talked in her house for hours. She explained how it worked. Her position gave her access to battlefield intelligence, threat assessments, operational planning.
She couldn't intervene directly without raising flags, but she could send anonymous warnings, coded just complex enough to avoid detection, but simple enough for me to crack. She knew I would. She taught me how. I wanted to tell you. When your father told me you'd join the Marines, I wanted to break protocol, contact you, tell you I was alive. But I couldn't. The agreement I made when I took this position, no contact with my former life, ever. If they found out I'd been sending you those letters, what would they do? At minimum, terminate my employment and revoke my clearance. At worst, prosecution for unauthorized disclosure of classified information. She looked at me. What I did for you was completely illegal, David. I violated my oath, compromised operational security, put my entire career at risk. Why? Because you're more important than any of it. The job, the identity, the safety I built here, you're my son. That doesn't change just because I had to disappear.
I wanted to be angry. Wanted to rage at her for the 12 years of thinking she was gone, for the grief I'd carried, for every moment I'd needed her and thought she was beyond reach. But I couldn't, because she'd been there, in her way, from a distance, keeping me alive when she couldn't do anything else. "What happens now?" I asked. She looked at me for a long time. "You go home. You don't come back here. You don't try to contact me. We can't do this, David. It's not safe for either of us." "That's it? I finally find you and I'm just supposed to walk away?" "Yes," her voice broke. "Because if you don't, I lose everything. And more importantly, so do you. They'll investigate, they'll find the letters, they'll prosecute me, and you'll have to watch me lose my freedom after I spent 12 years trying to find it." She was right. I knew she was right, but it felt impossible. "I'm sorry," she said, "for leaving, for not being there, for all of it." "Don't apologize for getting away from him. He told me what it was like." She nodded. "He wasn't always that way, but by the end, I couldn't stay. I couldn't survive it." "I understand." We sat in silence for a while. Then she walked me to the door, hugged me, held on longer than she probably should have. When she pulled back, tears were running down her face. "Stay safe," she said. "That's all I've ever wanted, for you to stay safe." "I will. And David, stop trying to decode everything. Some things you just have to accept." I smiled. "That's what Martinez said." "Smart man." I drove back to the airport, flew home to San Diego, went back to my life. Didn't contact her, didn't try to see her again. But 6 months later, another letter arrived. Plain envelope, Virginia postmark, coded message. This time, it wasn't a warning. It was just a message. "Proud of you. Stay strong. Still watching. R." I keep it with the others, in the fireproof safe. 17 letters from Afghanistan, 1 from after. Proof that I'm not alone, that somewhere out there, someone is still looking out for me. Still being my mother, even if she can't say it out loud. My father passed last year. Heart attack. Quick, they said. I went to the funeral. There weren't many people there. I stood by his grave and felt nothing. No anger, no grief. Just acknowledgement that he'd existed and now he didn't. But I thought about what he'd told me. That he'd loved her. That he'd let her go because it was the only way she could be free. Maybe he was capable of love in his own damaged way. Maybe that was the best he could offer. I'll never know if it was enough. I still work security consulting, still live in San Diego. I date occasionally, but nothing serious. I see a therapist now, a different one, someone who doesn't try to explain away the letters, someone who just listens. I think about her sometimes, wonder if she's still at Langley, wonder if she ever thinks about reaching out, wonder if she gets to be happy in the life she built. I hope she does. I learned something through all of this, about protection and distance, about sacrifice and secrets, about the different ways people show love when the normal ways are taken from them. My mother couldn't be there for my birthdays, couldn't call me on holidays, couldn't meet the women I dated, or know my friends, or be part of my everyday life. But she could send me coded letters that kept me alive. And sometimes, that has to be enough. Sometimes love looks like distance, like silence, like letting go so completely that you disappear. And sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I pull out those letters and decode them again. Not because I need to, but because it's the closest thing I have to hearing her voice, to knowing that somewhere out there, someone still sees me, still knows me, still chooses me, even when choosing me costs everything. I don't know if she'll send another letter. Part of me hopes she does. Part of me hopes she doesn't, because it means she's finally safe enough to stop. Either way, I carry those 18 messages with me. Proof that even when someone is gone, they can still be present. Even when someone has to disappear, they can still protect you. Even when your mother is supposed to be lying in a grave, she can still save your life. That's what I learned in Afghanistan and in a quiet house in McLean, Virginia, sitting across from a woman who was supposed to be a ghost. Some disappearances aren't endings. They're just different ways of staying close.